Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to have a very distinguished speaker among us, Professor Rajkumar from English Department, and I'm really grateful to have him here with us. I'm sure his very erudite and very distinguished lecture will help us all gain an insight into the complexities of caste system and its implications, uh, here in literature. I hope that this particular talk will help us all to gain an insight into this whole question of caste and literature, right? So may I request Dr. Afzal to introduce the guest of the evening today, Professor Rajkumar Rao, and I definitely would want to extend my very heartfelt uh, welcome to you, sir. On behalf of ELS, Zakir Husain College, Delhi, morning, I am very grateful to have you here. And now I request Dr. Mohammed Afzal to introduce the speaker of the evening today, our very erudite and distinguished speaker, Professor Rajkumar Rao.
Thank
Rajkumar.
you, Naghma ma'am. It's an honor and privilege to introduce Professor Rajkumar on behalf of English Study Society. Professor Rajkumar has been teaching at Delhi University since 1999 and joined the English department at campus in 2009. Professor Rajkumar is a leading scholar on Dalit studies and anti-caste intellectual histories. He has authored a book titled Dalit Personal Narratives, Reading Caste, Nation and Identity, published by Orient Black Swan. He also translated into English Akhila Naik's Bheda, the first Odia Dalit novel. His areas of research interest include Dalit literature, Indian literature, autobiography, post-colonial studies, literary criticism, and Odia literature. He has innumerable articles and papers in journals to his name on Dalit identity, B.R. Ambedkar, and caste issues. He has also edited the special issue on autobiography and the special issues on Dalit writings. In addition to a long list of research publications, he was also a research fellow at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla in 1999. He is also a permanent member of the Indian chapter of Commonwealth Literature and Language Association, Odisha. I can go on and on about his achievements, but because of the paucity of time, we have to move on to his lecture. Now I request Professor Rajkumar to deliver his lecture on caste and literature. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul. Yeah, so good afternoon to everyone, and I'm really grateful for the invitation. So I must be thankful to Dr. Naghma, Dr. Afzal, Dr. Abdullah, and all their colleagues of the Zakir Husain College morning. As the topic of today has been already announced, caste and literature. This is a very broad and general topic. So what I'll try to do, I will raise certain questions while delivering this lecture to make it very particular, the way, that caste appears in Indian literature. So I'll be very specifically giving examples from Indian literature in general, but Dalit literature in particular. Now, that the immediate question that comes to our mind is what exactly is caste? I try to emphasize, of course, more or less, we all know about, that caste system because everyone, that we are aware of about, that the way caste function in everyday life of India. But just to probe my point, I would like to also, that very, systematically try to address what exactly we mean by caste. Also, when do we get to read reference of caste in Indian literature? As a student of literature, we must be aware of about this. Also, that when do we get to know about the idea of Dalit writing? Because Dalits, who are now a new subject, I actually emphasize when I'm speaking, I'll be very particular about using certain words. So when I say new subjectivity, that Dalit for a very long time were not able to articulate their viewpoints in the public sphere. Of course, here and there, they must have either written or spoken. But since 1970s, with the formation of Dalit Panthers movement, 1972 to be precise, in Maharashtra, we get to hear about this new literature. What we mean by, that new literature is coming of Dalit literature. So with this coming of new literature, there are lots and lots of, that interrogations about caste system in India, about the subjectivity of a population who constitute more than 330 millions people in India. Also, that the new language, new aesthetic. So what I'll be trying to do in my lecture, I will try to have an assessment of how are we dealing with the new idea of, that literature, also language, also aesthetic, and the way, that we are taking forward the idea of what is called literary values. So what could be the future of maybe Dalit literature? Because Dalit study, as we all know, is, that a special discipline today all over the world. It is not just confined to India, but all over the world, that you go to any country, America, England, Germany, apart from India. And I'm reminded here that, interestingly, the title of today's lecture, Caste and Literature, is also a, the discipline paper for undergraduate students in Delhi University. Now, I must tell you to all my, the students and colleagues today, that we in the department wanted to formulate caste and literature as a compulsory paper for undergraduate students of Delhi University, English honors. But there were hues and cries from certain sections of teachers and students in Delhi University, and that is how, that it has been made now a discipline paper. Now, the logic here is that there are people, they don't want to study caste in literature. That is the logic, that. Because the first and foremost question, that people ask sometime, where is caste? And what is, the caste to do with literature? How can that term, that any literature which is caste specific? So these are some of the questions that I will try to address, though there could be endless debates, but I'll be happy if there are, the questions, queries, and also comments about my lecture. So, that caste, as we all know, that is in the domain of social sciences, mostly to do with sociology, as we all know. But so for my research, for last maybe, that it could be 30, 40 years, 30 years to be precise, maybe, that I started studying caste in literature, in particularly Indian literature, as an MPhil students. And so, that today's lecture is also culmination of my own research that I know about, that I understand, and also, that to appreciate some of the literary, maybe, the values inscribed in Indian literature. Now, to begin my lecture, these are some of the, that consideration I will definitely, try to put forth before you. We all know that, that caste was never a part of literary, that sensibility in India for a very long time. Why do I say so? Because to answer the first question that I raised, as a student of literature, when did we come to read about caste in Indian literature? Beginning from maybe, that early 20th century, to be precise, it is only coming after British into India that we see caste debates being deliberated in the public sphere. Never before. So one is the political issue, that caste became a very sensible but political issues beginning from maybe, that mid 19th century. Perhaps, that the origination I can trace to Phule, Jyotiba Phule, Maharashtra. And before Phule, of course, there were certain articulation, but Phule was the first person as an anti-caste intellectual, what, that Iron and MPhil course called anti-caste intellectual history and, the culture. And we trace the origin of caste debate in the public, what we say public sphere, in, the proper sense of the term, beginning from mid 19th century. So why did it take so long? Because caste existed from the ancient time. We hear the reference to caste beginning from maybe, that Vedic time, and particularly in post-Vedic time, when we turn some pages during Gupta period, say, there were not only, the references to caste, but also the idea of untouchability practices. Now, as I refer to Rig Veda, for example, I'll, try to go back to the way, that caste has its origination. Rig Veda, 10th Mandala, Purusa Sukta, this is the title, and Purusa P in capital, it suggests that Purusa, maybe, that it could be God in capital and also the creator, because according to Hindu Dharma Shastra, Brahma was the originator, whereas Vishnu is preserver and Shiv, this trinity idea, Shiv is the destroyer. Now, Purusa Sukta talks about Purusa, P capital, gave birth, that to 4 different categories of people. And we all know, that from mouth came Brahmin, from arms came Rajanya, of course, Kshatriya, from thigh came Vaishya, and from feet came Shudra. So these are 4 different kind of, that what you call Varna. This is actually, that so far as Rig Veda is concerned, it refers not just caste, but Varna. And these are 4 different kinds of. So if you, as a student of literature, we must also try to understand about the way the 4 categories, that existed in the ancient time, and later, of course, that 4th became 5th, Varna became caste. And I, that sometimes tell my audience that when did caste get originated, no one knows. Even sociologists, that you must have read several books written by sociologists and anthropologists, but no one actually, that knows when did it get originated, at what period of time. So when, why, how. Of course, we know, that later caste became a kind of reference point for division of labors, because if we know about, say, Brahmin, duty is only to preach and teach, because that is what the metaphor is, mouth. No, I'm reminded of your Dickens, Charles Dickens' Hard Times, where he talks about, that people should have head, hand, and heart combinedly. Of course, it is not, that isolated, but the 3 into 1. But in Indian context, how, that society got divided into not just 4, but 5th, that because there was another category called Ati Shudra at one point of time. So Shudra and Ati Shudra. So Ati Shudra became, that known as untouchable. Now, going back to, that the idea of metaphor, because as a student of literature, I'm really, that I try to invest my energy and time understanding, that this idea of how the 4 burners could be understood in a particular historical context. So, that the division of labors, as we all come to know about, that because the society has to function unless and until, that we try to create a class of people who are responsible for taking, that certain responsibility to carry forward some work of society. So Brahmins' duty became, that as teachers. So they will be always teachers, that whether they are, meaning whether it is ancient time, medieval time, modern time, post-independence, that even today, I remember about my own university, when I was doing my postgraduate, all my, the teachers were Brahmins, never, that any other category, that taught me. Now, so, that Brahmins' duties were to preach and teach, and of course, worshipping, that in temples. And Kshatriya, of course, to use their arms to defend the nation or the state. Vaishya, of course, that would do business, trade and business. And Shudra, of course, that to serve all other caste. This idea of serving all other castes, that because what happened, it was not just Varna became caste, Varna became Jati. No, that is what, that caste is. But several rules and regulations were made. A Shudra cannot, for example, study. So the idea of knowledge was, that only got confined to these three, that Varnas. So education was never, that allowed to say Shudra, Ati Shudra, and women of all community. That is very interesting. Yeah, because we'll also try to investigate the way women who constitute 50% of India's population, and of course, that happened all over the world. Yeah, in England also, women were not allowed to study, at least go to formal education. And about Jane Austen and many others, that they had to study at home and write their novels. So why is it that education became so sacred in Indian context? As we all know, Sanskrit, which is the language of God, called Deva Bhasa, and it was not allowed to women, Shudra and Ati Shudra, and stringent caste laws were made, which is called Dharma Shastra. And according to my research, there are more than 220 Dharma Shastras. And you might, that have heard about two or three, maybe, that say Manu Shastra or Manu Shahita or Manu Smriti. These are the same name, but different, that different name, but same book. Because Manu happens to be the first Hindu lawgiver of India, ancient India. And if you read, that this book, there are references where, that Shudra, Ati Shudra, and women should not, that be given education. So there is a reference to Chandal in Manusmriti. Chandal, who is an untouchable. So by the time Manusmriti was written, untouchability practice was there. I must tell you, my young friends, yes, particularly I'm addressing students, teachers they know about, but maybe, the students may not know the reference to Chandal. For example, that Chandal is responsible to carry out, that some of the tedious work, physical in terms of, that when I say tedious, both manual and menial work, I try to emphasize. So according to Manu, a Chandal should not possess anything. This idea of possession, there should not be anything, no property, nothing. What he should have is a donkey and a dog and a broken plate, and his, the dress should be worn out, the Tatar clothes. And the duty that he performs for society is a cleaning of roads, street, and all kinds of, the dirty work. He will be paid what is called, that leftover food. So it is no surprise that Om Prakash Balmiki, a Dalit writer from Uttar Pradesh, writes his autobiography giving a very powerful title called Jhutan, the leftover food, that how a community who had to work very hard, both day and night, were given what is called leftover food by the upper caste. So it is, the disposition of what is called, that Sudra and Ati Sudra community. Education was not allowed. And what is very interesting about, that dividing, that people into two categories, what sociologists call low caste and upper caste, that all the, that menial and manual works were performed by, it was compulsorily performed, there was no freedom. This is, that what we have to understand as a student of literature, that how is it that Dharma Shastra prohibited certain class of people to become, that not only poor, also become illiterate, because since they had no literacy, it took several, the century, not just, the few years, I say millennia, several century or millennia to become literate. So it is only after maybe, the British came to India, and thanks for Christian missionaries, that they started setting up schools and hospitals for Shudra and Ati Shudra and also women. It is no surprise that Rasasundari Devi, who wrote her autobiographical Amar Jeevan in Bengali, got published way back in 1860. So, that mid-19th century. This is the first India, that Indian woman's autobiography. So why did it take so long for a woman, even if suppose, that Rasasundari Devi belongs to an upper caste woman? Because education was not available to Shudra, Ati Shudra, and women. Now, what, that I want to also emphasize here is what is this caste? What exactly is the caste? As we all know, caste is basically a Portuguese word. If you do little research, you will come to, know that caste, the term caste comes from a Portuguese word called casta, which means it is a group. So the group could be, that it could be animals, birds, insects, or human. In Indian context, the context, human beings are divided into, as I said, low caste and upper caste. And this stratification, that is so much hierarchized. And we are told that there are more than 5,500 caste communities. So there are also subcategories of caste. It is not just caste, but subcaste and sub-subcaste. So when we talk about, say, Dalit communities, I'll come, of course, to the term later, say, Dalit communities today, who constitute, that every sixth person in India is a Dalit, as we all know. They also got divided. So the place that I come from, say, Odisha, there are 75 Dalit communities. So it is not a homogeneous group. Please, that try to understand. So when we talk about their subjectivity also, that the idea of, that the background, say, if you go to Andhra Pradesh, for example, where Kalyan Rao's, that Untouchable Spring has been described as a novel, we have to understand the politics behind, that two Dalit communities, Mala and Madiga. So if you say, study about Maharashtra, there are Mahar and Man. No, these are dominant Dalit communities. Or if you go to Uttar Pradesh, it will be, that different, that Balmikis happen to be, that different from the other community. Maybe, that UP election is there and you must be either listening or reading lots and lots of caste politics in UP. So also Punjab, because Punjab happens to be, representing the highest number of Dalit population, 31%. 31% Dalit population lives in Punjab. So what exactly, that is this division? Because there are also layers and layers of, that's what I say, subcaste and subcaste. So it becomes really difficult to understand the way caste politics work. Now, that I must take you back to little history before coming to literature. That caste became, there's so much, that sacred, following caste rules, because as I told you, there are 220 Dharma Shastra and stringent caste laws made, that Ati Shudra, who became, that known by different names. I must, that try to at least utter certain words so that maybe, if not, that very clearly you understand about the meaning. At least we know about the way, that these people are called in the history of India. Say, Ati Shudra became untouchable, as I told you. And untouchable is not just, that a byproduct of caste, because several things happen around caste. So the untouchable, that the idea of touch and untouched, what, the sociologists call purity and pollution. So if you touch a person, the upper caste would feel that they are polluted. So there are several measures like, that you have to immediately take birth. Yeah. Or going to give a dip in Ganges, the water of the Ganges. The river Ganges is considered to be most sacred river. Yeah, that is what, that Hindus, they believe, and that's why there are several, that festivals around river Ganges. Also, that Yamuna, no, you must be reading that, that today's newspaper suggests that the government of Haryana and Himachal Pradesh, they have signed an MOU yesterday to revive the river Saraswati, the sacred river, Ganga, Jamuna, and Saraswati. There is Trivedi Sangam, the most sacred place so far as Hindus are concerned. And that's why, that the idea of sacredness, for example, the idea of sacred, so purity and pollution, certain things are impure, for example, that the upper caste would not partake food from Dalit. And that's why nowadays Dalit politicians, whenever there are election, the upper caste politicians, just for a Photoshop, that's so that next day you see them in either newspaper or TV news, that they are so magnanimous at people, that people belonging to upper caste, that they would never mind partaking food with Dalit. It's very interesting. Yeah. So interdining and that this mingling is one of the perhaps, that measures that our social reformers start. I'll come to that point, that later. But untouchable, that the idea of untouchable, that if you touch certain people, then you will be polluted. And there are measures, of course, in Hindu Dharma system. So what made untouchable, that a social sufferer, if I can use the word, over the, that maybe over the time, they became also unseeable. I use certain words, that please pardon me. Unseeable because they are not to be seen in the sometime, the caste law made them not to be seen. During daytime, for example, there were restrictions for untouchables not to come. They will come in the night. And that's where there is a whole lot of people, that according to statistic, even today, there could be some 60 million people who are called criminal tribes. Yeah, criminal tribe in the sense that, that this is a term given by the British and we still continue. Yeah, some of the, say, Indian Penal Code carry maybe, that the similar kind of law. So untouchables were not allowed to come during daytime. So they will be, that coming to maybe villages and street during night, and they became criminal in the eyes of Hindu caste society. So they are just like nocturnal birds and animals, just like, that I give the example of owl. And very interestingly, a Tamil novel gives the title, that the owl, because Dalits, that in the past, they are considered to be nocturnal animal and bird, according to caste society. So they also became unknowable because one, literacy was not available. And number two, that there were no exchange of ideas. There was no communication between the upper caste and the lower caste. No civility. No, that way there was communication, whether it is cultural communication or others. Also, they are unapproachable. For example, that they cannot enter into, say, the upper caste locality. They will be living far away from the village hope. Even today, if you go to any Indian village, you will find Dalit bastis are in the outskirts of the village. And most of the time, there is no water. So they have to travel to collect water for 2-3 kilometers. So also for other amenities. It is just like ghetto, that what you understand so far as the Afro-American, that lives are concerned, ghettoization. So unapproachable. And in Kerala, for example, there were laws. I'll just give you maybe 2-3 caste laws so that the example will suffice to understand, that the idea of life that an untouchable could have been living in ancient time. Say, that if someone is an untouchable, then you have to walk far behind. If an upper caste person is, say, 64 feet, so you have to measure 64 feet. Yeah. They are also not allowed to come during morning and maybe, that evening, because their shadows will be longer. Morning and evening, the shadows are longer. And that's why they are asked to come, if at all they have to come for some work, because most of the menial and menial works are done by them. So mid-noon, that mid-noon, the shadow is shorter. So that the shadows are also, that shadows should not, untouchable shadows should not fall on an upper caste, that body, so that they are not, polluted. And the most heinous, the practices, as I always give, I should not forget to give, so that our young friends, they know about the kind of, the caste practices. One was particularly, that in Maharashtra and other places, they have to tie an earthen pot around their neck so that when they speak, this putum should not fall onto the ground, or it should not carry in the air, so that the upper caste should not be polluted. So every, the spit would fall into the earthen pot. And another was to tie an earthen broom around their back so that when they walk, their footprints would be erased so that the upper caste can walk on the same road. And in Kerala, where our friend, that Abdul comes from, Pulaya community, their women were not allowed to wear, that upper part of their clothes, that they should not cover the upper part of their body, so that the, that upper caste, they look at their naked body, particularly, that the breast, and, that enjoy the sight. And to make it complicated, they also impose a tax called breast tax. That if at all, that some daring lady, they cover their breast, they have to pay a tax to upper caste. And it is only in 1932 that the breast tax was abolished by the British. I always, that ask my young friend, what was happening in the world in 1932? In 1932, meaning there were several things, that happening, I'm sure. But one of the, that best thing that happened in England, the mother of democracy, we say sometimes, that women were allowed to cast vote in 1932 when the breast tax in Kerala got abolished. So these are some of the heinous practices, that caste practices. I'm sure that there were people who protested against caste. Buddha was the first person. And then Bhakti sent poets like Kabir. Kabir he was the most radical among many others. Yeah, we hear the name of Kabir, Chokamela. Of course, that Mira was there, Namdev, that Tukaram, Nanak, and many others. You go to any part of India, you will find a saint poet, Bhakti saint poet, protesting against, the caste monopoly and caste hegemony. Because it started in 7th century AD and went on to 17th century AD, 1,000 years of Bhakti. But I am reminded of Kabir, who used to, of course, that critique both Hindus as well as Muslim fundamentalism. For example, that he would laugh at if, that there was logic and reason, saying, the saying that the water of river Ganges are most, that pure. He would say that if that is so, if the water of river Ganges is pure, then perhaps, that the frog, the crocodile, the snake, those who are living in river Ganges, they would be, that first going to heaven before human beings, because human beings, the once in a while, they go and dip because they are living, that animals. That kind of, that criticism that came. Now, what happened, interestingly, that in mid-19th century, as I told you, that thanks for, the Christian missionary, education was made available to, that lower caste women, particularly, the Shudra, Ati Shudra. And Phule, as I referred to, he got, that educated both in Scottish missionary school as well as, of course, Marathi, the school. And, that the idea of education gave him a kind of consciousness, consciously trying to, that bring a critique of Hindu caste order. And that's why he started what is called Satya Sodhak Samaj, truth-seeking society. And what he came to realize that what is truth about Indian society is caste is slavery. And that's why he wrote a book called Gulamgiri. So Satya Sodhak Samaj is, that founded in 1871. And in 1873, he wrote this book called Gulamgiri, which is now available in English translation as slavery, whereby he justifies that caste is nothing but slavery in Indian context. He, of course, writes, that preface to this book. He dedicates actually, that this book, and his dedication is written in English, whereas the entire book is in, that Marathi. He dedicates this book for the people of America who have abolished slavery. This is what, that Phule writes about. And as we come to realize, beginning from mid-19th century, there were too many people now who are called anti-caste intellectuals. Ambedkar, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, whom we call Baba Saheb Ambedkar, of course, he took this caste issue not to just, that all India level, pan-Indian, what we say. He also took to the world, that so that many people, those who did not know about the, that hypocrisies of caste, they came to realize. And of course, we have so many people, maybe, that time may not permit me to tell about all these, that stalwarts, anti-caste intellectuals. So it will take time. If I talk about Ambedkar, maybe, that it will not be sufficient to even speak for 1 hour. So just a passing remark that Pule, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Perrier, that, and then of course Dhimapoi from Odisha, Ankali from Kerala, Perrier from Tamil Nadu, and of course that we have Achyutanand from UP. And there are several that I can just name few. Manguram from Punjab, Harichand and Guruchand Thakur from Bengal, and that there are several people who are considered to be anti-caste intellectuals try to bring this caste into the public, and they also contributed in that as they were all educated, they emphasize on education. Why? The question is that because education is freedom, education is emancipation. So Phule, and Phule, please write Jyotiva Phule, not Jyotiva, as I always emphasize. Jyotiva is Sanskritic and Brahminic. So Jyotiva. Jyotiva Phule and his wife called Savitribai Phule. Savitribai was illiterate, but then Jyotiva, taught him. And they were the first couple in India way back in 1854. Please mark this word. 1854, they set up a school for untouchable boys and girls. This is the first school, so far as that formal education for untouchables was available. 1854, never before, because education had been, that, as I told you, was a privilege of the upper caste only. Now, that thanks for maybe, that these anti-caste intellectuals, and of course we got independence. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was in charge of writing Indian Constitution, the largest written constitution in the world. He became the chairman of the drafting committee, as we know, and education was made compulsory for the that for everyone till the age of 14. So it is no surprise that few the educated Dalits, that not all of them were highly educated, of course. They started writing about their subjectivity. So from 1970s onwards, that what we hear is called Dalit literature. But before that, I should not forget, of course, that about during freedom movements, as a part of social reform, some upper caste and class writers, they got maybe influenced by maybe that some of the freedom fighters who were fighting not just for political freedom, also the social and maybe economic freedom. So just as a passing remark, I should say that from 1920s onwards, that when Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi gave a call for non-cooperation movement, here is a person from Andhra Pradesh called, the Unnava Lakshmi Narayan Rao. He, for the first time, wrote a full-fledged novel depicting Dalit characters, 1921. Yeah, this is called Malapalli. Malapalli happens to be the first Indian novel where Dalits are depicted, what I say, full-fledged Dalit characters. And from 1921, that you come to realize, I'll just, give some names so that if you have time, please read it. So from 1921, 25, of course, 1925, Premchand wrote a book called Rangbhumi, where Surdas, an untouchable, the Dalit character, who is also visually challenged person. Yeah. So double marginalization, we say. So 1925, Rangbhumi. Then, of course, we have Shivram Karant's, the Chomas drum, Chomana Dudi in Kannada, but Chomas drum, which got also, that presidential award, 1975, it was made a movie. 1933, this is Chomas drum, Mulkraj Anand's Untouchable, the very famous novel, 1935. And then we have Shiva Shankar Pillai's Scavenger's Son, 1947. Then Gopinath Mahant's Parijan is from Odia, that now available in English classes, 1948. And we have Anantamurthi's, the Sanskara and Bharati Pura, then Arundhati Roy's, the God of Small Thing. And there are too many, that I run an MPhil course called Touchable Tales, the representation of Dalit in non-Dalit writings, particularly fiction. And the last novel that we read is Mano Joseph's Serious Man. So if we read, that these novels of 100 years from 1921 to, say, 2012, what we find, the upper caste writers, they are, that they are showing pity and sympathy for Dalit characters. Pity and sympathy. Time may not permit me to analyze, that these novels. But if I generalize it as a matter of conclusion, what I find that Dalit characters are depicted quite negatively. For these upper caste writers, Dalit are lazy, quarrelsome, passive, docile, drunkard, cheat, etc., etc. Dalit writers will, that never think about, that having these characteristic of the Dalit characters. So let's, that come to the whole idea of Dalit literature then, that for another 10, 15 minutes, what I'll try to do, I will take you to the, maybe, that the realm of Dalit study, whereby, that you will get to know about some exposure to Dalit studies. So as I was telling you that from 1972 onwards, with Dalit Panthers movement, following Black Panthers, quite a radical, that name, it suggests Dalit Panthers, Black Panthers, because when India was celebrating 25 years of freedom, independence actually, Dalit atrocities were rising throughout India. And that's where, that Arjun Dangle, and then Namdev Hassel, Daya Pawar. These are some of the people, that you might have heard about. They came together to find what is called Dalit Panthers movement. To systematically, that bring a critique of caste, class, and of course gender, and religion included, and to give a vent to their anger. And this is how, the Dalit Panthers movement in Maharashtra. Thanks for perhaps, the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who taught us the idea of Dalit freedom. That Ambedkar was, that highly educated person. And he, that his speeches and writings got published way back in 91, 92, 26, the volume. So you might, that take a look at it if you have time. But the, that amount of writing, speeches, and the quality that he, is supposed to deliver to bring a critique of, and his finest book so far is Annihilation of Caste, 1936, whereby he suggests that only when there is, that annihilation of caste, India is not going to perhaps, that develop into even a common civil state. Yeah, the idea of nation state would perhaps, that disappear as long as caste persists, 1936. But, that we have not seen anywhere caste is getting annihilated, as we all know. Now, so Dalit Panthers, that very systematically they organize their movement, which is part of Dalit movement, of course. So what came out, that first, of course, Dalit poetry, if I can talk about the genre, because poetry, as we all know, is spontaneous, overflow, powerful feeling. And then came autobiography, because that is the best, that the Dalits know. And then came, of course, that fiction, plays, and now, that there are several other genres. Before I try to bring certain texts into, that analysis, let me tell you the term, that Dalit. Dalit is a term that is for the first time academically, we must, that because we are researchers, teachers, students, Dalit is a term that came to, for the first time in the academic, that use in 1830s, as early as possible, before Phule, yeah? Because we have seen Phule and Ambedkar both using this term sometime in their Marathi, the speeches and writings. 1830, if I can, that trace the history, there is a dictionary called, that Molesworth Marathi English Dictionary. Molesworth Marathi English Dictionary of 1830, which got reprinted in 1975. And the term, the academic, that entry, as I say, the term Dalit meaning, of course, that people commonly understand. Dalit comes from a word called dal, which means, the division, no? Oppressed, etc., etc. But here the dictionary entry suggests, the Dalit is a term. The first meaning of this word is ground. I must try to emphasize. Grind is the present tense and the past tense is ground. The second is, of course, down. And third is broken into pieces. So Dalit are those who are definitely exploited and oppressed by the caste system. But this term, that ground, the past tense of the word grind, when you grind, say, when you make juice at your home, or maybe, that if people, that making somewhere at juice kernel, you will find that after the juice comes out, there is nothing left out. So Dalit are those who are not only broken into pieces because they are divided into, the caste, subcaste, and sub-subcaste. They are not united together, hope you know about. Because when elections are going on, you find, that SP, BSP, BJP, Congress, that all political parties are being represented by Dalit. So that is what the reality of Dalit life situation. Now, that to bring to certain, maybe, that textual analysis, because finally our young friend, they will be writing the exam. So I'm reminded of, that say, how does one read the text? Now, if we go by, that the idea of the text, the texts are written both in Indian language and English, less in English and more in, the Indian language, mostly by first generation or second generation of literate. Say, the famous maybe autobiography that you hear, because autobiography is very famous, as I said, because Dalit, they know their life quite intimately, so they can express their subjectivity better. So Om Prakash Valmiki Jutan, I have already said, Bama's Karuku, and Bama's, that life history is very interesting because she is not just a Dalit woman, she is also a Tamil Dalit Christian woman. Now, I always, that try to emphasize this four position, Tamil Dalit Christian woman, because she brings religion into account. I should not forget here that it is not just in India that caste exists. In India, of course, every religious community, whether you talk about Christianity, Islam, that Buddhism and Sikhism. So that's why we use the word Dalit Buddhist, Dalit Christian, Dalit Muslim, Dalit Sikh, because it has entered into, that. So Bama's Karukku is a very interesting text whereby she tries to talk about, that how caste exists in the church, because in the church, that all the officials are upper caste, whereas the, that low-level workers happen to be, that either, that newly convert or the low caste convert. Now, that Baby Kamble is another autobiography from Marathi. She brings the idea of Dalit patriarchy, because there was a long debate whether patriarchy exists in the Dalit community or not, because Kanchailia, in its famous book called Why I'm Not Hindu, talks about the egalitarian, that practices in both Dalit and Adivasis, that community. But Gopal Guru and Sharmila Rege, they go to the extent by saying that there are instances of Dalit patriarchy even in the Dalit community. So Baby Kamle's, that autobiography, if you read The Prison We Broke, there is clear instance of Dalit patriarchy work. The Dalit women are, as that sociologists, they talk about, trebly marginalized, 3 times, because of caste, because of class, and because of gender position. They are subjected to, that be exploited within their, that home and also outside. Now, if you read a poem of, say, Namdev Dhasal is a Marathi, that he is a great Indian poet, and his anthology called Golpitha, which comes out of his own experience of being in, in a slum, in the largest slum in Bombay, today's Mumbai. Gulpita, that was a product of, the largest prostitute, area that Bombay has. So his language, if you read, it seems, that I always reminded of, though it is translated into English now, when he gave to Vijay Tendulkar, another great Marathi playwright, it seems he could not understand at least, that more than 65 words or so of Namdev Dhasal. So the language of Dalit, that it derives from the very, that everyday life of India, very ordinary, common, which was earlier not in, that not available in Indian literature. So Dalit writers like Bama, Namdev Dhasal, or that Basudev Sonani, or maybe that you name anyone, by putting this everyday language, they are also enriching what is called the purview of Indian literature. Now, Kalyan Rao's, that Untouchable Spring, particularly, this is, that a, new way to understand Dalit history. Also, this is a great, that epic that he is going to write, because this is a Dalit epic. If you can, that straightforward, that put this question, justify, Kalyan Rao's Untouchable Spring as a Dalit epic. Very deliberately and systematically, he has written 18 chapters, like Mahabharata has 18 chapters, no? And this is a story about 3 generations of Dalit family, and how Dalit for the first time, that they became rebel. Otherwise, that they were, otherwise, the Dalit never, they tried to suffer silently. But in Untouchable Spring, they tried to resist the idea of caste exploitation and oppression. And finally, of course, toward the end of the novel, he talks about how, that the only answer to Dalit atrocity is, that the use of gun, that violence, that I may not agree with what Kalyan Rao talks about, because violence will perpetuate violence. But then, that you cannot help it. As a Dalit writer, he is so much, that disgusted towards the idea of Dalit exploitation, that he says, that arms is the only way to perhaps, that protect the dignity and life of Dalit. Now, there are writers like say, I can refer to Ajay Navaria, short story writer, or Sanjay Bhag in this course, Caste and Literature. Ajay Navaria writes in Hindi, but his, that Dalit subjects, Dalit characters are very different. That these are people who live in cosmopolitan cities like Delhi. So the question is, how does caste get operated in a cosmopolitan city like Delhi? Does caste exist in Delhi? That is the question. Ajay Navaria very softly but surely talks about how in different public institutions as well as private institutions, caste gets operated in everyday life. So if you can, that take one example, Upamahadepa, the Iceland, that there are, his book called Unclaimed Terrain is very famous because, that everywhere talks about how a middle class Dalit, now we are using middle class Dalit because Dalit are also, that having got highly educated, enter into public offices. They are also, they're trying to articulate the language of the upper middle class. So Dalit middle class, how do they cope with, particularly in the 21st century, after globalization? I must not forget to tell you that after globalization, or what is called post-globalized world, caste has also traveled, not just, that a country like England, but also America, England. So you might, that know, say, Yasika Dutt coming out as a Dalit, diasporic writing, because maybe due to paucity of time, I may not be able to, that tell everything. But there are too many writings now coming from Indian diaspora, and these are called new Dalit writings. So the Yasika Dutt, the coming out as a Dalit, or that say Suraj Yangde, Caste Matters, and there are several writers writing from abroad. So caste travels, and hope that you can catch some of the news about that, because there are caste discrimination in abroad, particularly that during post-globalized the time, upper castes are getting organized very fast because of the technology, etc. And that's why Harvard University, in the meantime, because there were caste discrimination, they have brought out a law to protect, that caste discrimination, the victims of caste, that oppression. Also in England, that in Parliament there is a law already about protecting the interest of Dalit. So these are, that new thing that is coming up. So what I, that want to tell you is that when we talk about as a teachers, pedagogical, that approaches, there are lots and lots of things that we must try to do. So my conclusion would be that with the coming of Dalit subjectivity, though it came very late, that as I told you, caste became that matter of concern for very long to make that more than 18% population of this country a slave, so that they didn't have freedom. But now that that they are educated, Dalit are now articulating their freedom. So Dalit writings overall could be interpreted as that, let me tell you 2-3 things. One, that with the coming of Dalit writings, we know about, that not only new subjectivity, also new issues, which were earlier, that either ignored deliberately, or they, that the upper caste, maybe, the writers were not interested to know about. So there is new interaction, new level of knowledge, what Foucault talks about technology of knowledge. For example, Om Prakash Valmiki writing about his community of Vangi, and then that getting a title like Jhotan, how many of us would know that at the end of, that the day's work, they received, that leftover food. And Om Prakash Valmiki's family had no other means to survive. So that's where this, that this kind of writing, what Foucault talks about, technology of knowledge. Now, the second thing, that as I told you, that there is new language, but there is also new aesthetic. There are two good books on Dalit aesthetic. One is Sharan Kumar Lembale, that about Dalit aesthetic, and another is Om Prakash Valmiki, Dalit Saundarya Shastra, whereby they question the whole idea of traditional Indian, aesthetic, which is based on Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So the question is, what is truth? As I have already referred to fully. So, that literature should try to document truth. Also, that what is beauty if literature doesn't, that interrogate the idea of ugliness in Indian society, and what is, that welfare of mankind, not just, that welfare of few. So these are some of the questions that Dalit aesthetic, that try to interrogate. The last, of course, is, the Dalit are rewriting history, India in a big way, because, that they are documenting, the several aspects of life, and hope that those of us who are teaching Dalit texts would be sensible and sensitive to the, that issues that Dalit subjectivity talks about. So with this, maybe, that I'll be happy if there are questions. So thank you for your patient listening. Now, Abdul or Afzal, that we are ready to go for question answer. Thank you.
Good evening, Professor Rajkumar sir. There are a couple of questions that have come up. One is by Venkatesha Bhovi, who's asking about the role of foreign writers' contribution to the effects. Have the writings of foreign writers had any effect on the Indian caste system and literature?
Okay. Yeah. So, does he mean foreign writers, creative writers, or sociologists, historians? Because there are different writers. I remember, that if he is talking about creative writers, then we'll, they take only creative writing. But there are, I must not, forget to tell you that there are a whole lot of sociologists like Gail Ombet, Elena Zillier. I remember, that 7 or 8 people came to India to study caste, O'Halloran, and then, that too many people. So if it is creative writing, if suppose, that I don't know what exactly the question is, the creative writing, immediate writer that comes to my mind is E.M. Poster. E.M. Poster passes to India where he writes about Pankhawala. It is through this passage that Mulkraj Anand, because Mulkraj Anand's Untouchable, the foreword to Mulkraj Anand's Untouchable was written by E.M. Poster. And very interestingly, E.M. Poster talks about how the Pankhawala, that they happen to be low caste, and Mulkraj Anand might have got some ideas. Of course, Mulkraj Anand talks about, that M.K. Gandhi's, that idea of Raka. No, he had a, that one untouchable boy in his family, who used to work for them, and he got inspiration so that he wrote in one of the, that Delhi, which immediately got attention of Mulkraj Anand. But Mulkraj Anand's idea of writing about untouchable has to be also, that's seen as a kind of research that has gone in a big way to do with what E.M. Poster in his passage to India writes about Pankhawala. That look at the way their body dexterously, physical stamina. They have to work hard, and and yet they become untouchable. So, Tanya, I don't know, that what the question is. There are too many, that creative writers I can think about, sociologists, historian, and I'm sure, that the second answer to this question would be that, that foreign writers, while writing about maybe, that Indian untouchables, they may not be, that they may not have understood, that the way Dalit are now writing about their life. There is always a gap. But they also definitely, that took, by writing about Dalit subjectivity, they definitely took a cause to be highlighted in the public sphere. So that is the only answer I can give. Tanya?
Yes, thank you, sir. You gave a very comprehensive answer, so I think
Thank
this will
you.
help the student, whichever way they want to look at it. The next question is by Ashwini. He wants to know your opinion on the term Dalit literature and whether it limits the writings about Dalits.
To my, that understanding, Dalit literature would not limit. Rather, it would try to contribute a lot about understanding of Indian literature. Of course, that there are writers, Dalit writers, they sometimes they say, like I was telling you that Namdev Dhasal is not just a Dalit poet, but he is one of the great Indian poets. So people talk about the limitation, but limitation is not here my concern. Maybe that my position or my that understanding about Dalit literature is why not Dalit literature? Because we have Black literature, we have women's literature, we have now LGBTQ literature, tribal literature. It doesn't compete with each other, by the way. That we cannot place, say, Dalit, just because someone is writing a literature belonging to Dalit community. So that's why the first and foremost thing perhaps we have to keep in mind, instead of that making it as a kind of competition, it is perhaps that collaboration. It could be also that understood as a democratization. I will go to the extent by saying that let there be several voices, so that that our concerns would be to understand these voices instead of making that say it becomes negative only when you try to say that how come that India is one and you are that dividing that people into say several segments by telling Dalit. So if this is the question, I would go to the extent by saying that India is already divided into several castes, that region, religion, language, whatnot, and also ethnicity. India is divided. I forgot to tell you, that caste itself is a division of, that caste divides people, and the seriousness of caste, if I can emphasize, of course, is, that it not only divides people, but the idea of fraternity, the idea of fraternity is not possible. So I always, that give the example of what Benedict Anderson thought about, that European nation by using the word imagine communities. It is not possible in India to imagine as community. No, how much we talk about, that the whole world is my family. No, we always claim that that we all belong to one family, but that look at our house. Our houses are divided. So, that I will answer to this question by saying that let there be several voices coming from different, maybe, that kernels. And yet we can try to, that imagine a nation state, and also, that, that try to accommodate all voices, so that what India, that stand for unity in diversity. So this is a clear example of how diverse cities work in India. So I, that I also want to emphasize here that with coming of Dalit writings, there are, the diversities and pluralities in India. Tanya?
Thank you, sir. There are a couple of questions that follow the same strain of thought. So you've answered most of these questions, so I won't repeat them. There's another question by a student, Ritika Yadav from Delhi University, who makes a point about how in rural areas as opposed to urban areas, the caste system is still relevant. And so she wants to know how contemporary literature can identify these opposing realities, and how is it represented?
Yeah. A long question, that it will be not so easy to, that maybe answer the way, that she is asking, because rural versus urban, that say city versus village, all these are there. So what we need to perhaps, that tell that today, even in rural area, this, definitely in urban area, caste is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, that defended his position vis-a-vis Gandhi. There was a great debate between Gandhi and Ambedkar, because Gandhi, through maybe that his idea of Ram Raj, maybe that Gandhi wanted to take everyone into villages and self-sufficient village economy. That is what that he said, and this is where Dr. B.R. Ambedkar disagreed, because he said that what is Indian villages but den of hell, if I can quote Ambedkar. And that's why he asks Dalit to leave the village and go to the city, because city is at least that the place of anonymity. At least that people may not know about your caste. So immediate, that if you go to village even today, people will immediately ask you, what's your name, what's your surname, which caste you belong to. No? Well, while you are traveling, people generally ask you, what's your name, that better, and what's your surname. Immediately they want to know about your caste. Now, that there are too many now Dalit writers writing about this. So the first generation of writers, I will go to the extent by saying, the first generation of writers basically wrote about, that because they were educated, they live in urban, but they were reminded of their past, their village life. So you read Shivraj Singh Bachchan, or maybe, that Om Prakash Valmiki, or maybe Bama, or that they are Powar, or any first generation of writer. You go to any part of India, and Dalit writers writing about that how rural lives even today is hell. But that as there are second generation of writers like Ajay Navaria, I pointed out, or Sanjay Bagh, that he is an Odia Dalit writer, or Vasudev Sonani, another Odia Dalit poet, or that there are too many that I can name. They are writing about particularly urban issues now. So even today, Indian villages are hell, I must tell you, because caste practices are there openly, without any problem they try to that use not only caste names, also that whatever caste privileges. So there are writers even that today, because Dalit are not fully literate, and if we are talking about Dalit women, they are more of the more percentage of Dalit women are illiterate. Maybe that they can hardly be writing 23 or 24%. That the Dalit women could be called literate. even if suppose, that the claim could be more by Government of India. Now, this, the divide between rural and urban. So what, that I can tell you that I can give you too many other instances that in rural area, even some of the untouchability practices you cannot think about. Say, that cremation ground is not available to them. They cannot use hand pump for water. There is no common, that well to be used. And say Dalit laborers, they get, that not a decent payment. So there are n number of problems still in villages. Very crude and, that a crude form of untouchability practices. And that's why, that some of these maybe, that are given representation by Dalit writers. But as I told you that more and more maybe, that atrocities are happening even in rural area because people started claiming their rights thanks for maybe, that literacy, consciousness due to Dalit movement, organized Dalit movement, and also maybe, that some government programs and role of non-governmental organization. So one can find, that more and more atrocities happening in rural area also, meaning urban area, yes. But so what could be the cause of atrocity? That the number of cases of atrocity increasing every year. That is because Dalits have started demanding their right. Yes, Tanya.
Thank you, sir. One last question. This is by Shreyansh Gautam. He is asking, is it possible to judge or predict a shift in attitude of people? As in, he wants to know your opinion here about whether Dalit literature has made a major impact because it's mostly being read by educated people, whereas isn't the target supposed to be the illiterate, the majority of Indians and most of them aren't literate. So in this sort of situation, what is the impact of Dalit literature?
Yeah, so the impact of Dalit literature is great, I must tell you. Great in the sense that at least, the 2-3 levels. One, earlier there were no Dalit voices. Now, by Dalit, that Dalit writing their literature and getting published. And by the way, I must not forget to tell you that even though it is being written in Indian languages, they are getting translated into English and other Indian languages. Like I know, say Balbir Madhavpuri's Changia Rook, which was originally written in Punjabi, got translated immediately into Hindi, and now it is, that Urdu. Even in Pakistan, they are reading. By the way, that this is, that Balbir Madhavpuri's autobiography has been recently got published in Pakistan, so I know. Or Bama's, that Karuku has been translated into how many? 16 languages, including Latin, Greek, and, forget about English. So by, that writing, Dalit writers now writing about, that whatever form they are writing, they are getting translated into English. And one good thing about, that Dalit writing is that immediately Dalit are able to organize mobilizing resistance. That is what I use the term. So whenever there is, the violation of human rights, thanks for technology and post-liberalized, that economy, that say, whenever there is any violation, that, so there are new medias, Dalit media, say Dalit Watch, Roundtable. We should not forget about all these, that social, the social media working very well. So, that mobilizing opinions against, that injustice. That is one. The second, of course, that the great benefit of Dalit writing is that it is also a learning lesson for the upper caste. because many of the things upper caste otherwise would not know. You know what I use the word technology of knowledge, say Dalit cultural world, because there was no communication, I said in my lecture. So this is the only via through which that upper caste could be, that educated, because I should go to the extent by saying that Dalit writings have made upper caste to be sensible, at least that to their brothers and sisters, so far as human rights concerned, so particularly educated. But the third and most that perhaps that negative comment that I would like to give, that maybe that upper caste sometime that in a platform like this, I always that tell this, that educated, particularly articulate upper caste, they look like what is called revolutionary, that in public platform. When they go back to their home, they hardly that allow, say, caste to that enter into their, particularly say that Dalit discourse to enter into their everyday life. Meaning there is a guarded interest, and that's why the last question Dalit writers always ask: will you give that marriage that your daughter to my son? In other words, that the interaction, particularly that at the level of academic is fine, but so far as that the private spaces are there, it has not perhaps that been successful. Gandhi, of course, that at one point of time talk about changing of heart, but that heart will change only when you realize, and then that try to act. What Paulo Freire in his famous book Pedagogy of Oppression, that talks about the ideas are to be practiced. So he uses the word praxis. So how many of us are ready to the practice what we that otherwise learn in classroom or in a seminar like this? That is the question. That I remember, and I should remind you. You may not agree. Some of you will be angry that Robert Chambers is a famous who has written about that development in India, particularly that he has two good books, putting the first last and putting the last first. These are two good books. So if you have time, please read it. He says, and he comes to Uttar Pradesh, even though he is 84 or 85 years old. Um, he comes to Uttar Pradesh rural area to do his experiment, particularly that human excreta to be turned into that fertilizer. No, so is that developmental that expert, and he has an essay whereby he says that India is basically a hypocritical society, because what we preach we don't practice. So, that this is my answer, that we may be revolutionary in classroom or in a platform like, this, but how far we are able to take certain ideas and put into action, that is our, that problem. So thank you for, that putting this question. Tanya.
Thank you very much, sir. Would any of the teachers present here like to ask any questions?
Naghma wanted to, Ruchi, of course, Ruchi is asking. Okay, Ruchi?
Yes, go ahead, Ruchi.
Yeah, good afternoon, Professor Rajkumar. So this is not a question.
Yes.
But just want to say that I so much agree with the last part that you just mentioned.
What happened?
That how many of us are actually ready to accept the equality that we so much talk about, like revolutionaries in our classroom. How many of us actually take it to our private spaces? And let me also mention this. This has been my experience, that even in the staff room where all the big revolutionaries and activists who sit there and who talk about we are the ones who believe in equality, hum karenge sab kuch. There are many of them who would like to ask your surname. And there have been, statements like somebody doesn't look like a Dalit. Oh, somebody can speak a particular language. Oh, really? You can speak it. These are the statements which are actually made in spaces which are considered to be temple of knowledge, temples of knowledge. And these are the same people who in the, when they are in their public images are actually built upon their, this, their all being the flag bearers of equality and all. So just was happy to hear that you've mentioned it in a forum like this, and it is required. And I don't really think that one really needs to be sorry about that about saying it, that people who are preaching it are actually not practicing it. I have to risen above that. It actually has to be said. People have to be called out for that. So that naming hasn't started yet and we should avoid it, but then that's the fact that remains, that we talk so much about it and we write so much about it, but are we really practicing it? And now the second one, sir, is a question, which I really don't get into that because I find it very debatable. That that a Dalit or a non-Dalit can never represent the problems of this community the way a Dalit writer can. The same question is often posed for feminist literature also. Can a man write as movingly and as authentically as a woman can? So what would you like to say about this? Because students often ask this question when I teach that individual and society it can usme bhi, I mean there is a question there. Do you think that Premchand can write it better than any other Dalit writer? So what would you like to say? What would be your comments on this? Because I particularly find it very debatable.
Okay. Yeah. So, Ruchi, thank you for that, that first thing. And the second, of course, that this is a debatable topic, whether, that non-Dalit can write about Dalit, man can write about women, white can write about black, etc., etc. These are always debatable topics and you may not come to a consensus, but what is, that very important to understand about is that anyone can write about any, that subject. If I'm a man, I can write about women. It is another matter that how do I write? That is the question. It is not the matter of, that why I should not write, but the question is, how do I write? As that I'll give you the two maybe the parts of answer to this question. One, Dalit Panthers has a manifesto, the 2.5 pages, whereby that they say that anyone can write about Dalit. Why not Premchand, Mulkraj Anand, or Ananta Murthy? That anyone can write about Dalit. But how authentic, that their voices. So the idea of authenticity will come only when, that Dalit writers write about their own experiences, because, that non-Dalit writers, the fact that they have not gone through the kind of, let's say, the everyday life experience. Say, Mulkraj Anand, has not only written a book called Untouchable, but his autobiography, if you read, Apology for Heroism, the title of his autobiography. Apology of Heroism is really very, that fantastic so far. Someone has, that written an essay combining Gandhi, Nehru, Mulkraj Anand, and Neeraj Chaudhary's 4 autobiography, and comes to a conclusion that Mulkraj Anand's autobiography is the best, Why? Because Mulkraj Anand confesses, that's why the title is Apology for Heroism, that he confesses that being born as a Kshatriya, he cannot enter into, that the everyday life of the low caste because he's privileged. How much, that he's sympathetic to the, that life of the low caste. So that humility, as a writer, is very sensible and sensitive towards, that what he understands and what he writes. Now, as I told you, that the problem is not writing what you write, what you write about, say, Dalit subjectivity. And as I told you earlier also, that when non-Dalit writers write about Dalit, they basically show pity and sympathy, which Dalit they don't need. Dalit are also, that they are also human beings. The problem is that, we sometimes don't consider them as human beings because Indian upper caste society treated them as dogs and cats of the street, or less than that, because Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, when he started his Mahat Tank Satyagraha in 1927, whereby the public tank, that for the first time got open for Dalits, but the upper caste would not allow them. So legally it was open, but then practically they would not allow. So you read, I'm sure that Ruchi, you have, read that lecture, the public lecture that Ambedkar gives. And I must quote him, whereby he says that we are going to drink water from the Mahatang Satyagraha, not because by drinking the water from the tank, we are going to heaven, because we are going to exercise our freedom and claim over what is called civil right. This idea of civil right, claiming freedom, the idea of freedom, exercising freedom. So what I want to say is that if this is the case, that the upper caste writers basically, that when they write about Dalit characters, they always try to show pity and sympathy, which Dalit, they don't need it. So what happens to, the Dalit writers then? So when Dalit writers write about Dalit subjectivity, look at, that they may not win the war that they are going to fight. But, that what they are trying to do, they are, that trying to portray what is, that what is real, the realities of life, which sometimes, that evade when you read the upper caste writing, because sometimes they are so imaginative that they are unreal. So I think, that anyone can write about any, that class, or, that it could be any community, any gender, but it depends on how you are writing. That would be my, that. So Prem Chand, for example, Rangbhumi in 2004 was burned down by Dalit activists because Prem Chand is being, that charged as someone who basically, that portrays Dalit character in a stereotypical way. No, he always, that writes about Bhangi, Mochi, and maybe, that some of the negative, maybe, that words being coined for the low caste, whereas for the upper caste, that Rai Sahib, Bahadur, Dr. Mehta, and all kinds of, that. So these are some of the, the questions that we can always, that. So to, if you ask me question, that what do I believe that Dalit writers can write the best, that, and they are the one who could be, that authentically not only presenting but also representing Dalit, that life. That is what perhaps, that my conclusion would be. Ruchi?
Yes, so at least you have conclusive answer for that. Matlab, I still feel it's debatable, but thank you for your comments, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Naghma, you wanted to ask some question, Naghma? No one? No question? No more question, perhaps. People are tired, must be.
I think we don't have any
Afzal?
other questions.
No questions.
Professor Rajkumar, I didn't
Yeah.
really have a
So
question.
let's conclude.
Uh,
Yeah, there are no questions. Yeah, Professor
Am I-
Anuradha. Yeah.
I had, in fact, I had a question basically, but it's taken care of by Ruchi's question and your very detailed answer to that. I was just, when you talked
Okay.
about the negative portrayal of Dalits in certain books, I was thinking about the idealization or the reification of Dalit characters as the flip side to that kind of portrayal. But you've just spoken about it, and I just want to say a thank you for this very comprehensive, very accessible, and completely clear vision that you've
Thank
given
you.
us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Dr. Kumar,
Yeah.
Professor Rajkumar, thank you so much for a very erudite paper. So very good,
Thank you.
excellent lecture. And now I request Dr. Afzal to present a vote of thanks. You must be very tired, and you know.
No. I'm still, that there is a smile on my face. You can see me.
Yes, I can see that, and
So
that is really wonderful. You had such a, you had so much of patience with all the questions, and you gave such detailed answers. I'm really very grateful. I really
Thank
agree.
you.
I cannot agree more with you on the issues that you raised, and thank you so much. And I request Dr. Mohammed Afzal to present a vote of thanks. Right, Afzal, please can.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. It is my privilege to propose vote of thanks and acknowledge the contributions of those who worked really hard to make this event possible. First of all, I want to thank ELS convener Ms. Naghma Zafir for reactivating English Tree Society after a prolonged hibernation. Thank you, ma'am, for providing us motivation and chairing this talk.
Thank you.
Now, on behalf of English Tree Society, I want to extend a hearty vote of thanks to Professor Rajkumar for his insightful talk, which has revealed to our students a significant aspect of literary studies. Thank you so much, sir, for sparing time from a very busy schedule to grace the occasion. And we will keep bothering you for such events.
Yeah, please, thank you all.
A special mention goes to our respected principal, Professor Sangeeta Pandita, for granting us permission to hold this talk and providing us financial assistance for the event. I'm also thankful to IQAC for their cooperation. I must express my sincere gratitude to the teacher in charge of English department, Ms. Tanya Lahon Warjri, for her unflinching support and guidance for organizing this event and her handling of question answer session. I also want to thank Mr. Abdul Hameed for hosting this talk and a meticulous planning of this program. Last but not the least, a very big thank you to teachers and students whose presence and interaction made this event a success. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you.
Very much.